And welcome. It's Mary Ellen McGonagle here with your Friday afternoon MEM Edge show, the show where we bring you where the action is in the broader markets. As usual, we're going to take a look at where those broader markets closed. But first, let's take a look at some of those news items that were highly impactful last week. First up, we did get a tentative trade deal between the US and China that brought restored confidence in the markets. But as we move through, of course, today's news regarding the tensions in the Middle East has disrupted the markets. And we'll take a look at the impact there. Some areas that are benefiting, other areas that are faltering due to that Mideast conflict, and also other news items. We did see inflation coming in, CPI and PPI data, both were muted. So that was good news for the markets as well, that we did not see hefty tariff-induced upticks in inflation. Also on the news this week, I'll share with you a company that showed a huge uptick in semiconductor sales. We'll talk about the impact there on the rest of that industry group, which fared well this week. And then, of course, also taking a look at next week's data items. The FOMC will be having their meeting where they will announce any shifts in monetary policy. Now, at this time, no one is anticipating a change in the interest rate backdrop. However, comments will be closely reviewed for future shifts down the road. So let's go ahead and get started and take a look at the broader markets. And here we are, a daily price chart of the S&P 500. And earlier in the week, we were advancing closer to this prior high, but of course, today's pullback has put us just below this 10-day simple moving average. We do still have a positive RSI and a positive MACD, so that near-term uptrend does remain in place. We're going to talk about other policy shifts that are out there as well and how that impacted specific industry groups. First up here, we're taking a look at the 11 underlying sectors in the S&P 500. I've sorted those sectors by relative strength in descending order. So first up, we have tech still in the forefront this week. The group was about third in net performance for the week, but it is still up here at the forefront due to the prior 2 weeks, very, very sharp move higher. We are above that 10-day simple moving average with XLK, positive RSI, positive MACD, uptrend still remains. As we move through, energy has moved to the forefront. I talked about energy last week because it was beginning to firm up. And of course, news today, as far as conflicts in the Middle East, has pushed energy and oil prices up quite significantly. I will share with you the area that is faring better and a couple of stocks that are setting up quite nicely in that group. So as we move through, I do want to also highlight areas that are faltering a bit. XLF, for instance, it was down about 0.5%, but you can see on today, it did now post a negative RSI. We are below this 21-day simple moving average, and we have a negative biased MACD. We did see some heavyweight names, and I will share those with you, that were down quite a bit on news from Walmart and Amazon. So that will explain at least some of the weakness in the financial sector, but also we did see bank stocks pull back a couple of % this week as well. And some other areas that I want to highlight and make you aware of is the fact that staples ended on a very weak note, despite the thinking that we would potentially go into more defensive, safer areas. This is XLP, consumer staples, and the group closed below its 50-day simple moving average with a negative RSI. So we are back in that period where we are beginning to see some of these weaker areas break down. So of course, this is something I will be keeping a very close eye on, because ideally we like to have a broadening out of the markets, more participation to give encouragement that the uptrend will remain very firmly in place. So from here, let's go ahead beneath the surface beyond these 11 sectors and take a look at the sub-industry groupings that I use that are very helpful in really fine-tuning where that strength is. So again, RSI sorted in descending order, 2-month daily price chart view. And we do have up here at the forefront software. Now, software was a little soft today, but we are still holding firm above that 10-day simple moving average. This area has been a clear outperformer, certainly within tech, but beyond that in the overall market. Oracle, of course, came out with blowout numbers. We'll take a quick look at that chart and a couple of other names in that software space. I did mention semiconductors, and they had hit a near-term high on Wednesday before pulling back, and certainly today's 3% pullback, again, finding support at this 10-day simple moving average. We're going to take a look at a couple of names with an eye toward should you buy the pullback, when that would be advisable, and instances where you would not particularly want to participate in any pullback. Let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of other areas because I do want to highlight that move into gold, safer haven area, gap up, and quite a nice advance to a new high in price. And then also as we move through, we did see biotechs begin the week on a relatively strong note, petering out toward the end of the week. We are seeing a lot in healthcare as far as headline news. Trump's talking about trying to reduce drug prices and so on. So it's a group that is in flux, healthcare in particular. And then we also can see that small cap names struggled this week as well after hitting a new high on Wednesday. This is in line with those bank stocks, economically sensitive areas that are continuing to try and find firm footing. Let's take a look at one area that did advance certainly today, and that's the volatility index. VIX is sitting up here at 21, and this is not what we want to see. I've talked about that 18 being a critical level for volatility. As it begins to rise, oftentimes you will see a negative impact on the broader markets, not a direct impact, but certainly a correlation to increased volatility, also known as that fear index. Also moving through, I did mention bank stocks faltered. Let's take a look at another area. This is XHB, home builders pulling back after surprisingly hitting a new high on Wednesday. And of course, one of the reasons for that is the rise that we have seen in interest rates and yields, which is surprising. Oftentimes, US Treasuries are a safe haven during geopolitical strife, but not so. We can see that interest rates today ticked up. We ended the week on that 10-year with a yield of about 4.4%. So we are not certainly extraordinarily high, but the movement is not in the direction you want, certainly for home builders and mortgage related types of products. So I did want to share with you the S&P 500, and what we are going to look at is a view that is very, very easy to download on stockcharts.com. Again, a 2-month daily price chart view sorted by that RSI. So from here, we are going to pivot, take a look at some of the areas that are faring better because of the strife in the Middle East. But let's go ahead and start with Oracle. I talked about their earnings, and the stock gapped up into a base breakout, phenomenal volume, and then take a look at the follow-up volume and the 7% gain in an otherwise relatively weak market environment today. So what I'm going to share with you from here is an intraday chart. This is for traders that are a bit more active, and share with you how you can use this chart as a guide for further super near-term upside. This is a 15-minute price chart. Here's yesterday's gap up in response to earnings. If you see this intraday here, again, a 15-minute price chart, if that third bar posts above the high of that first bar, you oftentimes will see further upside. We did fizzle a bit into the close, but this was a significant gain. And then here we are on today's open. And then, of course, a significant advance beyond that. I did want to highlight a couple of characteristics here for those that are and have an appetite for this type of intraday trading is the fact that the RSI did remain up above 50 in positive territory. Likewise with that MACD, meaning if you had gotten in here or here, you would still be on the lookout for further upside because of those bullish metrics. And if we go out a little bit longer, I'll share with you what to be on the lookout for. Quite naturally, it will be the opposite. This is a 1 hour price chart, and it's not quite as clear, but what I am going to highlight for you is the aftermath, or certainly what can take place after a sharp advance relative to that near term. So first up, if you see the individual stock break below the 5 or 13-hour simple moving average, and you get a MACD crossover and the RSI trending lower. Now, this is not as significant as certainly I can highlight other names, but it does give you a sense that it did proceed for the next couple of weeks into a downward slash sideways type of price action. So that's a close look at Oracle. Let's go ahead and move through, take a look at some of these other names that have now very swiftly moved up to the forefront of the S&P 500 as it relates to their positioning relative to other names. LHX, now this is going to make an awful lot of sense. It is a aerospace and defense stock, and defense names did have a very strong day today. So here we are with Thursday's base breakout on very significant volume, and then today's gap up on very high volume. So the momentum is clearly there. It's listed up here at the forefront of these S&P names. Let's take a look at another group that is faring well as far as what's going on globally. This is CF Industries, and they, among other items, they do provide fertilizers. Today's bombing did have countries such as Egypt having to stop their production of fertilizers because of bombing. And hence these other companies will come in and pick up that slack. So the overall group is moving higher. And then, of course, energy. Here we are with the top energy on a relative strength basis, Apache, APA, and again in the S&P 500. And we had already had a nice advance. This is that setup I was talking about last week relative to these energy names. We are now sitting at that 200-day simple moving average, if we can get up above that. But we are also in an overbought position as well. But more importantly, certainly from my work, is this ability to very quickly get in front of what is working and having a very sound reason as to why. Northrop Grumman, another defense-related stock, gapping up, sharp advance, newly moved RSI and MACD into positive territory. So these are the kind of setups that certainly, as long as that strife remains in place, they will tend to fare better. And then down here at the bottom, and I'm going to just take us down to the lower quartile here with that view of looking at names, you always want to be aware of where that weakness is emanating from, because you want to make sure that you are not heavily weighted, or at the very least own stocks. So I talked about Mastercard and Visa falling today, and this is all about Walmart and Amazon both announcing that they are looking into producing or having what's called a stable coin. It's very different from Bitcoin. It does not fluctuate, but it does allow these companies to bypass the high payment processing fees that they have to absorb. So on the news, MasterCard and Visa both dropped pretty significantly, 5% each. They are both heavily weighted, in this case, financials, and you can see the impact is certainly pretty swift. It'll be interesting to follow that news. New technology is always something that I like to see as far as innovation, but we can see that not all areas will benefit. Another area that is getting hurt by the high oil, we see oil prices were up, I believe, $5 today. But here we are with UAL, and it's only one example of these airline stocks that faltered due to the potential for increased oil cost. And then I did talk to you about Visa. We can just take a quick look at that. Interestingly, it undercut that 50-day, found support. This is where we can pivot into buying on a pullback because this candlestick overall is bullish. Again, that dip, buyers came in. However, we do have a negative RSI, super high volume, but that high volume could be because those buyers came in. So this is a very conflicting view, but net, I would await for that RSI to indicate an upside. So from here, we can just pivot very quickly to that intraday chart and take a look at that 15-minute. And here are those buyers coming in on the dip, but we're not seeing as much volume as we saw on that initial selling. Still has work to do with that RSI needing to get up above 50 before being compelling as far as that particular name. And then some other areas that we can take a quick look at that are faltering a bit here. I mentioned that bank stocks moved lower, certainly today. This is Comerica CMA. And for the week, the stock was down 5%. So definite weakness there. From here, let's go ahead and take a quick moment to review the ARK funds. And quite simply, this is because with the market's pullback into Friday and general wobbliness and volatility increasing, you're going to want to really stay sharp, stay on your toes, particularly if you are a near-term investor. And I have found over the years that because of the nature of these ARK funds, they are quite volatile, very high momentum, and they're very sensitive to shifts in investor confidence. So here we are with ARKF, that's their Fintech Innovation ETF. And what I wanted to highlight is the fact if we go back to that February, the beginning of that bear market period, many of these funds were the first to falter. We did get the negative RSI, and then from there, the decline was very sharp, certainly higher than the broader markets. Now, nicely enough, the advance to the upside is a lot more than the markets as well. But again, as a proxy, something you can keep an eye on to test investors' appetite for these higher momentum, more innovative stocks. So from here, we're going to take a look at some other names that have pulled back last week and could, in fact, be interesting on the pullback. So first up, it's not a super dynamic name, but it is one that did pull back this week. This is Emcor EME in the industrial sector. They are a heavy construction company. And we did see this general pullback in the overall group into Wednesday. So this is that what I talked about as far as that bullish candlestick where the stock dips and buyers come in on that dip so that it closes in the upper reaches of its trading range. Now, the difference between this and the name that we were looking at earlier is the fact that the RSI remained positive, and that is what you want to look for. Since then, we have been able to inch higher. And if we can get back above that 10-day simple moving average, it will be back in a strong buy zone. Another name that we can take a look at that pulled back this week in line with other names. That's something too that you want to be aware of. Is it just your stock or did the overall industry group falter and it's not specific to your name? In other words, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with the company. It was an overall drop in the group. So here we are with Palomar, PLMR. This is an insurance stock. And yes, the group overall did falter. And you can see in this case, we pulled back to that 10-day simple moving average. However, here we are with that RSI. Now it is getting back into positive territory. We closed just above that 50. And I would like to see more volume on that buying. But net net, it does appear that the valuation, the stock at that point in time was hitting a new high. We did get that pullback, so not quite ready for prime time. Let's take a look at another name that faltered this week. It was down quite a bit. This is Intuitive Surgical, ISRG, the Da Vinci robotic surgical devices. And here is a gap down. Now, again, nice bullish trading activity, buyers coming in on that dip, but a very defined negative RSI. Now we have a negative MACD. And equally important is what is the news? What drove Intuitive Surgical lower? And the fact is that a major Wall Street firm downgraded the stock primarily because there are new competitors. ISRG has been the leading robotic surgical product provider for years. And what I can point out here is let's go ahead and take a quick look at a monthly chart. And here we are with Intuitive Surgical way back here in '04 at the forefront, leadership name. And what's shaping up now, certainly with new technological advances, AI, and other applications, there are competing companies that are coming to the forefront. So you will want to have that information in mind because that is a very rightful reason for sales to potentially slow down and hence the stock to trade lower, but also technically. So there is a view as far as looking at names on the pullback. Last up here, we're going to take a look at an area that fared really well last week, and that is the alternative energy. Now, let's just take a quick look here at XLE. And I'm wanting to share with you that it did break back above that 200-day simple moving average. Take a look at that volume. So clearly, XLE has moved into a confirmed uptrend. And for a lot of us, we would think that it is going to be these exploration and production companies, and they did fare well last week. Here we are with Diamondback, FANG, one of the E&P names that was on the move higher. We can also take a look at COP, any number of names in this group that is faring well. They do benefit when the price of oil is increased, so you'll want to know that. Beyond that, there has been a big move into alternative energy stocks, those that provide nuclear energy. And first up here is Brookfield, BEP is the ticker symbol. And the company provides a 7.7% yield. Nice bonus there. What I wanted to highlight, and we'll go ahead and pull up a weekly chart, that we are moving closer to a potential longer term breakout. Now, the thing with any name, really, if you pull up that longer term weekly chart, it will give you a view not only of the potential going forward longer term, but also from here we can see that BEP by and large does have a volatility characteristic to it. So you will want to certainly keep an eye on it, unlike other names that trend a little more orderly and not so wide a diversion between the upside and the downside. OKLO, you can see this nice move into a base breakout. The company was awarded a contract to provide nuclear energy to the Air Force Base in Alaska. So good news there, retaining that upside. And that's it for this week. Everyone, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that like button. Hope everyone has a fantastic weekend. I'll look for you here again next Friday.